everyone, and welcome back in track 1. I'm here with Mattias Michaux, and he's gonna talk today about enhancing Mautic's release and the Mautic's release planning and strategy. Sorry, folks. Voice here already. Long days of Mauticon. Let me introduce Mattias real quick. He's the director of engineering at Dropsolid, and there he's mainly focusing on the Dropsolid product offering and hosting. And he's also an active member of the Mautic community. Many of you have probably seen him somewhere in Slack or in GitHub. And he's also the team lead of the product team, and he's also supporting the security team. Yeah, I think I'll just hand over to you, Mattias. I'm really looking forward to your session, and we will have the Q&A afterwards. And for now, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and indeed, let's go. I will share my screen. Yes, there we go. All right, there we go. So what do I want to talk about today is about how we can enhance Mautic's release planning and release strategy, because yeah, we need to do something about that, and I will come to that in a bit. Like I'm already introduced, yeah, I'm Mattias, been around in open source world for a long time, in Mautic for about 3 years. And as people may have noticed over the last years, I'm a huge fan of automation and optimizations where possible. So yeah, but let's get forward about what the session is about. So what do I want to talk about is the current state of specific releases that happened, or the current state of Mautic and the release cycles and so on. Ideas and thoughts we discovered or had with various people, the proposal for the new release planning, and how we're going to make this work, because yeah, you can have a plan, but how do you see the feasibility of it is also important. And of course, your thoughts. What do you think about it? How you see things should still be different and so on. So to be clear, this is a proposal. This is not exactly how it should land. It can still be adjusted, but at least it's a starting point to start the conversation and to see what's feasible. So let's get started with the current state. So I just looked up some numbers before this in preparation of the session. Of course, I was aware that it was this situation, but at least. So Mautic 5 was announced in October 22. And then there was the blog post about, yeah, we plan to have an RC in November and a release in January 23. In practice, the first beta came out in October 23, and it was released actually a year later than planned, 24. That's for a major release. That's a major release. That's with big underlying changes. That so yeah, that's how it went. There were a lot of impacts of the Symfony updates and so on. But also for like the last minor release, something similar happened. It was planned for mid-April, and it was released in June. So even for like smaller iterations of changes, we have an issue with releasing it in a specific schedule. And also looking then at, for example, a major release like for Mautic 5, what happened the day after Mautic 5 was released, a patch release was needed to fix something. To be clear, and this is purely stating facts, not finger pointing or whatever or whatnot at anybody. I just want to figure out how this happened and what we can do in the future to do so. And the same thing then, 7 days later, another patch was needed to unblock another thing to ensure that people could upgrade. And this is strange. This is not normal if you expect to build a product where there is like a whole workflow of testing and figuring out how to move things forward, and then suddenly this happens. To be clear, this is purely the current state I'm stating. Another thing is the list of PRs. We currently have 298 PRs that are open, which more than 170 were open before beginning of this year, and even 19 were open before a year ago. So this is a lot. This is the 99 features. There are like features that are there. Somebody put effort and time in it to propose some feature that would benefit Mautic, and it's not picked up to be in a release. So not ideal at all. So these are facts. these are facts. Then you can say the same about Mautic 4 releases and previous releases for Mautic 4.2 or 4.3 or 4.4. So what did we do? We and I mean then that's various people in the product team or other stakeholders that were involved on what can you do about this? What would be feasible? So there are some things that we checked on and that impacted or had impact on what I will what the proposal that I will suggest in a bit. But basically, how do you actually want to do releases? We need some more structure. Do we want them just at random as it is now, as it is in practice now? Do we want to fix quarterly or biannual releases? Do we want to look into the concept of feature releases, which means do we want to focus specifically, let's say 5.2 will be focused on the campaign builder. Is that something we want to do? Do we want to have releases focused on the PR backlog? Basically, all the pull requests that are open. Do we want to focus on that? Do we want to like triage them into all the PRs that have a relation to a specific domain or a specific, maybe even a company that's made most of those PRs? Is that a possibility? Do we want to look into sponsored minor releases? Do we want to say, okay, the 5.3 release will be sponsored by company X and Y, and they will put effort and time in it to ensure it moves forward? What about long-term support releases? Because let's face it, it's at this point, it's not the smoothest try to go from, or expectation-wise, or what you get back from 4.4 to the latest 5.1 release. So do people still need for other requirements, maybe than even Mautic and even be the underlying system, that they need an LTS support? Other things that crossed our mind: do we want to combine bug fix and security releases? Like GitLab recently announced, like in March, they announced from now on they are just combining patch and security releases. Every patch release can also contain security fixes, and the other way around. If there is an urgent, it's more the other way around. It is possible that the security release, if it happens, that all the patches that have been committed up to then will also be part of it, because they strictly adhere to the structure of what can land in a specific version. So those are things we heard. So that are in various discussion in the product team. So I will reference that also at the end. So that's also where we want to have people's input. So in the product team meetings of the last months, this topic came up a few times. That's also where the plan comes from to address this. So that's where where those ideas were heard. Also, there's also feedback that came, for example, from the first draft from people that say no, the suggested time that the previous version is supported is way too short. So that helps. That's also the input that we need. That's also what one of the last slides is. Yeah, what's your input or how you see it? So please give input and feedback in the question section or in the Q&A section. So let's go through it. What are we actually, or what is the idea that's on the table right now? So first, let's go what the goal is of this plan. Why want to change it? Because we want to have predictable releases, predictable in multiple facets. We want to have releases that are on time, which means no more, it will be next week, or it will be next month, and eventually it will be next year. Yeah, that's just not doable. It just also puts a lot of drag and efforts on people, for example, also for those pull requests that live there if a release is not happening, because that means again to re-roll patches against the new version that has been released, or to keep it alive for a way longer time instead of being part of the ecosystem already. That also means that releases should, if possible, have a specific topic or feature or BC breaking change that they want to introduce. It has to be clear why a release is happening. Also, releases should be properly tested. It should be reviewed. It should be clear that what will be in that release will actually be working, and that the use cases that it should cover are actually be tested. And also ensure that releases are exactly what you have tested before. If you ask people to test an RC release, a release candidate release, and afterwards another 17 features are added, so to say, yeah, that's not a good idea, because then you have your scope changes of what you actually wanted to release in the beginning and what you actually release at the end. So that are one of the 4 goals we want to have. So what are we suggesting? And I will go step by step through it. We want to go to monthly patch releases. Every month there's a release of every of the active branch. Well, I will go into depth in a bit. So I will just give the summary here. So monthly patch releases, quarterly minor releases, and a yearly major release of Mautic. And for the minor release, we will have a month support for the previous one, And for the major release, we have 6 months support for the last major one to ensure that there is overlap. So how does that look like? And also I'll explain why and what the impact is. So let's go through it. So, but first I want to highlight, because I'm not sure if everybody is actually aware of how releases happen, and basically what does a patch, minor, and major release mean. Basically that comes from the SEMVer approach, semantic version, which means that you make your version numbering aware of what the scope is of the changes that can happen. A major release is basically the first number of your version, 5, Mautic 4 or Mautic 5, contains incompatible API changes that happen under the hood. That can be from in Mautic itself, in this case, or for a dependency of Mautic. For example, a PHP update that needed changes in PHP code that changed the way specific functionality works is possible. Minor releases are basically new functionality that's added, but that we can add in a backwards compatible way, which means if you're using it or not, it will not change your current workflow. There is no impact for you if you would not be having an integration that builds forward on Mautic itself. And a patch release is basically, there is a bug in Mautic, we need to address, it's addressed, and so on. And so I gave some examples of the version numbering that you could encounter, just to ensure that it's clear for everyone. So what are we suggesting? So what I just said here is like here, monthly patches, quarterly, minor releases, yearly, major release, and so on. How does it look in practice? What you see here is basically the current state of Mautic being 4.4 is there, 5 is there, 5.1 is there. But at some point, we want to enroll in some plan where there are releases that are more predictable and planned. And so basically, what does that mean? That we are aiming for, it can like literally shift the whole way to the side. If it takes longer to actually approve this proposal, but it means that the first release following the schedule would be the release of 5.2, which would then happen in October, with 5.3 being there in January 25, and then the next major release would be Mautic 6 in April 2025. And so on and so on. So the cascading effect. So, but that's only the start point of release. Of course, there are 2 phases in before releases. That's basically, one is the beta. When can people like see if there will be impact for them, and one is the RC. One is clear what actually will be released. One is the scope, 100% clear of what will be released, because that's really important to ensure that it's there. And therefore, of course, it makes a lot of sense to have more time in the RC phase to be able to really test it and ensure that it's there for a major release than it is for a minor release. This schedule doesn't take into account patch releases, because those are purely to fix bugs. This is purely where functionality changes are or BC breaking changes are. You see also a thing here, you see here the lines. This is basically the major releases. Why are those important? Because those are the moments that we can introduce changes that break backwards compatibility, which means that if you have an integration with Mautic, you will most likely need to change a thing or two. Where are those aligned with? With dependencies of Mautic. Dependencies are really important to make such a plan, because you need to plan ahead of what will happen in the future for specific dependencies. These are some of the dependencies, but the most important ones that Mautic relies on. Of course, there are more. I will also say about that in a bit. But basically, those are the dependencies that we already know that exist, or if they are in black, or if they are grayed out. It's like this still needs to be defined or ensure that actually release will happen. But at this point, we know, for example, if the plan would take place, that for Symfony, we can stay on the Symfony. We need to update to Symfony 6.4. Why do we need to update to Symfony 6.4? Because by the next release, Symfony 5.4 will not be there anymore. There will be no security support anymore. So we don't need to check what's needed here, but also what will make the bridge to the next major release. And that's also why it's so important to make yearly releases, to make that hop faster, and to ensure that we're not like we did for Mautic 3 and for Mautic 4 and for Mautic 5, to have the leap there, to make a huge effort to update Symfony and update this and update that. And it's not realistic. Even a smaller or big community doesn't really matter. It's just like how you should be able to address dependencies. Same for PHP. So that means that for for Mautic 6, if this plan would take place, we even could stay on PHP 8.2. There is no specific reason unless there is some feature that we need to update to another version, because by the next yearly release, yeah, it's still feasible to be there. Of course, it makes complete sense to check how compatible the code of Mautic is and what the needed change is. But that's an assessment we can make, and then we can decide, no, Mautic 8.4 will only be for Mautic 7. It can be a valid, PHP 8.4 will only be for Mautic 7. It's a perfect valid thing that we can decide. The same for MySQL, the same for MariaDB, the same for Doc3. So basically this means, and I will zoom in on that, what it actually means for the release and the impact for the releases. So this is basically high level. So based on a fixed schedule and taking into account the dependencies, the most crucial dependencies of what Mautic depends on to keep it secure, safe, also in line with industry. It doesn't make sense to be, even if Symfony 5.4 would still be supported for 10 years, it doesn't mean we should stay there, because that also means that you're lacking behind on other projects, and you're also lacking behind on other dependencies that require a recent version of dependency. That's also why all these versions, well, not all, but Symfony, we depend on long-term support versions of vendors where possible. So for Symfony, that's the case. For MySQL, that's the case. MySQL now recently introduced long-term support versions. We should adhere to them. It makes it easier also for vendors, various hosting vendors. MariaDB, Doc3, something not per se that has long-term support versions at this point. But again, then looping over the releases. So the monthly patch release means if a bug is fixed by the date the release is there, it will be released. If a security issue is addressed by the date the release should happen, it will be released. Very simple. It's just what's ready is released. Plain simple. Just moving forward. Not waiting for a specific thing to be QA'd and so on. No. Ready, released. If it doesn't happen, it will be for the next release. Of course, exceptions. Critical bugs, like the one I just mentioned, the fact that you couldn't update from Mautic 5.0 to you couldn't update to Mautic 5.0. Yeah, we need a release to do. We need to make a release, otherwise everybody is blocked. And the same for critical security issues. They can happen out of band of the patch release, the monthly patch release cycle. Quarterly minor releases. Every change feature that is non-BC breaking, where there is no backward compatible impact. So that's something that really needs to be assessed also by the person QAing the code and checking if it's valid, because that's the point where it will be, no, it will be for the next release or the next major release, because we cannot do that. We cannot do that because we will break backwards compatibility. That's also a reason why we want to have yearly releases. You don't want your feature that you really want to have in there to wait for an unknown amount of time, because that's the current state between Mautic 4 and Mautic 5. It was unknown when your BC breaking change would be able to land. So that also gives perspective to people working on specific changes. And every feature that has been that is ready and has been tested can get released. I can be very hard on that level, but I can just say we want to release by, I say something, the 10th of October. And by the 10th, your feature is there. It's ready for QA. It's there. It's ready. But it's not tested, not approved. It will not be in there. We will not wait. It will be for the next release. Because otherwise, we cannot move forward, and we just drag along the pull requests that are there that are ready. So, yes. And a quarterly release, it's a feature release. It can be focused on a specific domain. So let's see then what the domains or what could be themed releases. That could be. And then, of course, you have the yearly major release. And that's, I say, can have BC breaking changes. It will have, and I'm quite sure. And the same there. If your BC breaking change is ready to be tested and it's done, then it can get into the release. Therefore, also the prolonged RC time and also the prolonged beta time, because we want to ensure that people have the time to do so and that the community is aware of the change that needs to happen. Yes. But what we could also, and I think that's a good plan, we don't need to focus, with this kind of schedule, we don't need to focus on having a major release with new features. A major release is just to address the BC breaking changes, because the next minor release can have the feature really wanted. Because that's not something that's happened over the past. Sometimes the major release is also, oh, look, all these new features for this major release. But the major release is purely to address the BC breaking changes and to move forward from there on. And that also helps if you have those yearly releases to not have a very long time to wait for those releases. And then let's say this plan is agreed upon. What would that mean? What would that mean? what I highlighted here is the potential next three of Mautic 6, Mautic 7, and Mautic 8. Mautic 8, there are so many dependencies you don't know yet of what will be the state, so it's even more hypothetical. But what I want to highlight here is the things in yellow are the things that will have BC breaking changes. PHP 8 is somewhere in between BC breaking, but anyhow, normally that's okay. But that means for Mautic 6, we definitely have to go to Symfony 6.4 and to Doctrine 3. But for Mautic 7, there is no hard dependency if you don't want to make BC breaking changes of one of our dependencies. So that also makes the release of Mautic 7 way easier if you do it yearly. If you would do like previous time, you would the next major release being Mautic, the time where Mautic 8 would be, then definitely we need to be on Symfony 7.4. So this also makes our life easier if you have the yearly releases. Of course, there's a star next to that dependencies thing because there are more dependencies that needs to be taken into account. That can also be like libraries. I think about the whole Swift mailer, Symfony mailer change. That's also a dependency that changes, but it's not here on the slide. All right. So I already explained this. Why more releases? Because we want to be predictable, and having a schedule there makes it more predictable, makes it also the expectation management when something will be ready. We also go way faster and moving forward, and yeah. And also, if we missed for me or the release, okay, it will be in 3 months, or we have this bug fix, it was not ready enough yet, okay, it will be in the next release, the next patch release. So yeah, of course, cool. Having a schedule like this, but what about security? How are we going to tackle security? So I'm just going to move back some slides. So by here you would see that, for example, let's say the schedule works, and the moment you're let's say August next year, Mautic 6.1 will be supported, but Mautic 6.0, no security patches will be there. That's the baseline. Of course, it's perfectly possible that if there is a very, very good reason and we definitely want to do it, it's up to the security team to address if they want to backport specific changes to, at that point, unsupported versions. But it's purely up to the security team. But of course, but because of that, we also add extra people to the security team to be really sure that, for example, to support Mautic 4.4 and have the security support there to support every major version for a prolonged time, we definitely want to be sure that we can do that. So extra people were added there. And what about a long-term support release? That's also, I'm anticipating on questions that probably would have come, but I think it makes sense. Ruth also mentioned this during the state of Mautic. That's something we're looking into, or the council is looking into, how this can work, because that would be a kind of service that the Mautic community can offer. But yeah, that's something to be checked. And what would the impact? It's not known yet, but I think it's a given that it will be discussed, and that will be a plan will be looked into to actually be able to support this. And then, okay, cool, yay, hooray, cool plan. But how do we move forward? In this phase, we're still gathering further input, because this plan was discussed with some people, not enough. That's why also this presentation, while it would also be a blog post to gather further information. I agree then with various people involved in it, and then release a blog post and update relevant documentation pages. So it's not only clear for people present in this meeting or reading blog posts, but for the whole world, how actually Mautic releases will happen from a specific point in time. Okay, cool. How will we do this? How will this be a feasible solution? And what's not clear yet on how to do this. The biggest issue on releases is commitment on time. It's basically ensuring that something that's there, that's ready to be released, is actually from A to Z moved forward. There's a lot of and there's a lot of momentum in the community on the community Fridays, where a lot of stuff happens and things move forward. But still, to be able to release, sometimes it boils down to a few people to be able to actually do the last mile, to actually have the release there. That's something we definitely want to look into, to also ensure that the process is, and that's what I come to in a bit, also as automated as possible, that the human factor or the manual action besides the sign off is actually less user heavy, so to say. But also, how can we check? How can we ensure that as a community we can have those guarantees on commitment? How do we ensure that it's possible? Same thing, like I said in the beginning, I'm a huge fan of automation. We definitely can automate our release flow further. There are, I think, 7 or 8 steps that manually needs to be done that definitely can be just automated away, or even like by reshuffling some of the steps, even harden the whole flow. But also, automation doesn't only go for the release process itself. It also goes about the testing the code. We have a lot of tests, and still we manage to make releases with where the feature that has tests it still has bugs. So we need to automate further that test suite. Yes, and that's this slide basically. So I'm going to zoom in directly that we need more people that are able to focus on test and review. That's basically like the list of PRs. Most of them are blocked, or are the next step is somebody to actually test it and review it. And that is basically it's not a one-way street. It's basically if somebody can pick up the ticket to test it, it means maybe it's also not clear what it does or how it should be tested. So it's a multi step thing. It's not only the people that we need more. It's also the ensuring that they actually can test. Another thing is we need to ensure that we are aware of the common cases, which are most likely covered by the feature or functionality the person is suggesting, but also the edge cases. If a specific feature has multiple options, they should be tested. All the options, not only the happy part, so to say, but also like the edge case or like the variation on it. We're doing that for like, for example, PHP versions and MySQL versions, but sometimes also configuration options, they need to be tested. We need to widen or test suite to ensure that we can guarantee the quality that if a person uses a specific use case. And that's also why it's very important if you would be testing it and you have a specific use case, mainly in the RC phase of a release, please test that use case, give feedback. Look, we are using this a little bit different or with this kind of configuration, and it works differently. Other things are like automated tests and the end-to-end tests. I'm so happy with the Google Summer of Code project that will focus on testing. It's so important to have those tests because we can have all the tests we want on the functional, on the technical level, so to say, the unit tests and so on. But we need to end-to-end tests. The bugs happen in user-facing parts, not in the underlying functionality. Not only in the underlying functionality, but most of them happen in a user does action ABC via the UI, and something breaks. Well, we need to test that part just from start to end. So I'm really happy with that initiative. I hope it really helps in improving the quality of releases that we can do. And also a very simple thing: if it's not ready and not tested, it's not in the release. It's very simple, because otherwise, the only thing that you're doing is prolonging our release cycle, having a fast QA and a fast test, and that doesn't help with quality of releasing. And also a thing we are looking into is, we also need to figure out what we're going to do with the list of PRs. We need to ensure that we take into account the value that is in those PRs. So maybe it could help to have, like, say, the 5.3 release will be related to, or will be focusing on all these PRs that focus on campaign builder. And we're not introducing new functionality, as in new functionality, but we're introducing the functionality that has already been written by a person, and that we want to merge in. And of course, that's for example, the web mechanic has been really active in providing a lot of those PRs that are unfortunately stale now. So I think that makes sense to look into. Can we make a team around that, like a team release on what they did on specific domains? Maybe chime in with other companies that have a similar feature, because we need to get rid of that backlog, because it's so sad to see that the same PR for the same bug or the same feature is built twice or even 3 times that just addresses the same thing. And it's also, of course, explaining to people how they can look into the PR list. But it's strange that you have to look into a PR that's 3 years old or 2 years old to find that functionality. Another thing that could make sense to look into is a sponsored release. Why not look into what Symfony basically does? They say, like, I made a little screenshot there. So, for example, the Symfony 7.1.2. So even for the patch releases, apparently they do, but I think it's for the minor releases. Rector, for example, sponsored that release. And we need to figure out, is this feasible within the Mautic community? Is it something that can be done or not? It's an open question. It's not to be answered even directly. It's more like, is it an idea that you can have that a company or a set of people contribute time, or because the most valuable resource there is time to ensure that you can move things forward for reviewing, testing, making specific functionality, and so on. Okay, I have said a lot, but now I want to see if there are some thoughts. So and feedback on this plan, how you look at it, what's basically the ideas that's or the what pops into your mind when you think about this. So what is your input here? So I'm not sure. Yes, perfect. I was just
Hi, I'm still here. Yeah, thank you very much for the insights into your plans and the strategy. Of course, it's really, really important for the Mautic project. Yeah, I would also love to hear how people think about it. So maybe those folks who are still listening, even it's
yeah, and
late.
even like very simple yes, no, like, do you see this feasible or do you see this in practice? And not only from the end user perspective. So if you are like a contributor to Mautic, it's also, do you see it feasible for you to work towards such a kind of schedule, or like by providing PRs, by QAing, by testing PRs and so on? Because it's really important. It doesn't make sense to build a plan that there is no traction with, because then you need to revise the plan and need to find consensus on maybe in smaller steps iterate towards that plan or not. So I really want that that people can get that input, not per se right now. It can also be on Slack in the product channel and so on. So
All right, we've got a chat message from Lola. I think I would just bring it to stage so everyone knows what we're talking about.
yep.
I think I need to stop your presentation. There it is.
Yes. That's a good question indeed, and indeed, I also come from the Drupal community where, yeah, where that's a little bit more. Yeah, also you can compare the two communities. You know, there's a big difference in size also, and in how it's organized and how long it already exists. So it's a difference. But indeed, this is not only a plan, but of course, indeed, the KPIs or the metrics for the plan are as important as the plan itself. So indeed, I fully agree with that. It should be there, okay, because that also means that you can basically what could be there that we say, okay, the first 3 cycles we went off by 10 extra days what we had anticipated for. Why? Because last minute bugs pop up. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to prolong a specific QA time, or we need to ensure that more people are present. So those are definitely important. Yes, definitely. Okay.
You also talked about the huge backlog of PRs. Do you have an idea what's holding back people from testing? I mean, for testing, you do not even need to be a developer. You
It's
just need
it's various things, because it's not only sometimes it's like difficult to test something that you're not familiar with. Which I mean, for example, one of the issues that was which hold back Mautic 5.1 was an issue with SAML, a way of logging into Mautic. But if you're not familiar with how to do so, that's a technical one. But indeed, some of them are not technical, and some features are like just, okay, we want to bring this specific feature to the table to make the life of a marketeer easier to do task A or B in Mautic. There is no problem. The problem arises when there is a feedback loop, there is an issue, and at that point, the initial person who created the PR can't react at that point. But at that point, also the branch or the PR itself is not in line anymore with the current version of Mautic, and that is a big issue. And then the problem starts, because then you put the burden again on the person initially creating the PR to fix that, to ensure it's moving on, and so on and so on. So that's why I think we need to have a separate plan for the release plan. Should not focus on removing the backlog, but we should embrace the backlog while executing the release plan to ensure that the people putting effort in moving those PRs forward again, that they can do it in a timely manner, that we know, okay, this will be an effort for, and it's very simple, for 3 months, simply said, because that will be the next minor release where the feature will be landed in. we put effort in that time. That's the scope. The scope will be clear. We move forward that way to ensure that I completely feel the pain of those people doing so, because it makes no sense. It's tedious. You're rebasing a pull request, and sorry, indeed, it's a little bit sometimes a technical terms for non-technical people, but you're rebasing a change over and over again without value. You don't see the value of it because it's not merged. It's very simple. So yeah, that definitely, yeah.
All right.
All
Anyone
right.
else wants to share thoughts on this? Yeah, that's very important what Ruth just mentioned.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, Ruth mentioned indeed that it's really important to not underestimate that work, because it's just a burden for those people. It's basically you have a burden on your back the moment you create a PR if it's not get merged. And some people just also drop at that point. They say, okay, sure, if you're not merging it, fine. We use our own fork, or we use our own version, and we move on. But that's not what you want to do with an open source project. So we definitely need to address it. I also don't want to. It's also, we could say, okay, let's make that a KPI, or a real hard metric that you want to get those pull requests under the 100. But that's also involving like people like triaging pull request. Does this pull request even make sense? Is there not another change that basically was merged into Mautic? Because I think a lot of them can be re-triaged every now and then. So that's also something somebody could do to check, does the idea of this PR, is it still valid? Is it still something that's a bug or a feature or a change that can happen?
Yeah. So Ruth just added would be like really, really good to merge those PRs that got rebased within a week or two. But maybe
Yes.
you can better say if that's like feasible or not.
Yeah, I think that's definitely feasible, because that's definitely feasible if you have traction with the creator of the PR or the person who picks it up. Yeah, there are some techniques in GitHub to transfer that, or remake the PR, to at least that the person who takes ownership of the change to the and have a good flow with people who take ownership of QAing it, properly QAing it, technically functional QAing it, and so on. And then indeed you can have that momentum there. Why not? Literally some features, new PRs are moved within less than a day, so to say. So why is not that possible? It's just, and that also boils down to that the why of the PR needs to be clear, and that's made of some of the old PR. That may be the issue, that it's just not clear, or just not how do I need to test this. So that's also what I think with what a triage team or a triage separately from the release plan could help with, is ensuring that all those PRs are definitely clear on what it does and how it should be tested.
Yeah. And Ricardo and Ruth just brought up Gitpod in the chat, and I also think that's like a huge gain already, that even as a non-technical person you can just have your Mautic set up within a couple of minutes. Yeah, Ricardo mentioned it takes a while. It does, but still it's really, really convenient, I think.
Yeah, and for most of the PRs, that should be enough to get started to test. And indeed, it takes a while. That's also something, like you said, I'm a fan of automation and optimization. So if you can optimize the speed of getting people on board, yeah, why not? It can be like a fun project for somebody to just look into what makes it slow. Like, what is if it takes 10 minutes, what takes 7 minutes out of it, and how can we address it? Does it make sense? Can we speed it up in a specific way to even get people faster on board and so on?
Yeah, cool. Let me check Q&A. Ruth got one more question. She's asking, how do we educate developers to write good test instructions?
What I most of the times ask is, what steps did you? Why are you basically building this? There has to be a reason why you build a specific PR. You bring functionality, or you are fixing a bug. So what's the bug? How did you basically encounter the bug? Is basically, and then you do the same steps again. What I also want to have, what I also think comes into mind, is ensure that you also think about, and what cases could probably be related to this change. What are the other? So, for example, it's a simple example, but let's say you make a calculator and you only test the plus functionality and not the minus. Yeah, that makes no sense. You know there is a minus. So let's see what you see around the PR you're making that also could have impact. For example, if you're making change the filters on overviews, like filtering on contacts.
Mhm.
Yeah, does it also work for companies? Does it still work for companies? What are the testings that you think of? And also, it can be a feedback loop, because the person who QAs it also needs to list, I tested this, and that, because then in the end, we tested all this functionality. Why is that also important? Because then you can automate those tests. The moment you have the scenario there, is already a part of the end-to-end test, where you can say, okay, this bug happens in this domain, happens so many times, so we want to have an end-to-end test on that. It doesn't make sense. Simply said, it doesn't make sense to start creating end-to-end tests of the login form, let's say, because let's say historically there has never been reported a bug of an end user not being able to log in for a specific reason. Yeah, we're not gonna, doesn't make sense, but there has been a lot of bugs on a specific domain, let's say filtering on contacts. We should focus on that. And that also this thing helps that the developer explains what actually these are the steps that I did to test, that also the front-end test can take into account, or the end-to-end test can take into account. Yeah. But it's basically, it boils down to finding a methodology that explains, ask yourself these questions on how you want to address this issue or this pull request. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let me check the chat again. Ricardo has an idea.
Yeah, about the triaging. I think there's some work has been done there, Ricardo, to already triage in specific domains or front and back end, but I think we can go even further and check with people who have been active around in the community a long time, what would be feasible to do so to make sure it works, because indeed that would definitely help. Because it's also not interesting if you let's say you put effort every Friday on Community Friday, you put effort into going to the board, and every issue that you see there you don't understand, or you don't have, for example, you don't have a developer background, and it's only coding related issues. Yeah, well, that's very hard. So we definitely need to be sure that's clear upfront how you who could address or who could test that PR. Yeah.
Yeah, very important.
Yes.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of our session. Last chance for folks to have a very last question to Mattias while he's on stage. If not, he already said you can contact him on Slack.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, this Slack, the Mautic Slack, and the T product channel, or and so on. Or we also will create, of course, then the blog post in there. There will also be then the forum topic that will be related to it, where the whole discussion can start. I think it could boil down to the drafts blog post, so to say, with basically the summary of this with this in, and then in a few weeks the actual plan. This is how we're going to do it after the input of the community can be given further. But I already want to have an overview here, because I think it makes sense to discuss it as broad as possible.
All right, then. Thank you, Mattias. That was really interesting and so important for the community. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this. So see and hear you later. Yep. Bye bye.